to the official podcast at ContentChampion.com. Join our heroic quest to discover truly epic content marketing. Introducing your host, the content champion himself, Loz James.
Hi guys, welcome to show number 29 of the Content Champion podcast. Thanks as ever for listening. With me this week to talk about the content marketing imperative is the man who bet his career on content marketing, Michael Brenner, Head of Strategy at NewsCred. With over 20 years' experience in leadership, marketing and sales roles, Michael has a very positive outlook on the future of content marketing and why your business needs to embrace a content marketing culture. On the show, he also talks about the NewsCred content marketing software system and shares a number of key industry insights. So let's dive in. Thanks very much for coming on today, Michael.
My pleasure.
You're head of strategy at content marketing software firm NewsCred and are quoted as saying you've bet your career on content marketing. I'll go on to ask why in a moment, but first, our audience loves to hear our guest stories, so could you tell us a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So I have been in the professional world for just over 20 years. I started with the leading marketing research firm in the world, the Nielsen Company, and actually started my career in sales and was selling essentially customer insights and information to the largest consumer brands in the world, companies like Kraft and P&G and the Wrigley Gum Company. And really it shifted my focus into a marketing career, feeling that I could really help more people in the marketing function. It was the one thing that I enjoyed with the process of selling. And so joined the marketing profession and haven't looked back since. I was there for about 10 years. I was head of marketing for two smaller companies, really started doing content marketing even before we called it that, with limited resources and no team to support me. And then I joined SAP about 8 years ago. I did demand generation, field marketing for the company's North American business before moving into a corporate role as their head of content marketing strategy, where I really sort of rode the wave, I think, that we're all seeing happening with content marketing. After setting up a fairly successful program that's been recognized as a case study around the industry, moved over to NewsCred, where SAP was a customer and had selected NewsCred as what we felt was the leading content marketing software technology in the marketplace. And so my role is essentially to help other brands to be successful with content marketing as well.
We'll go on to talk about NewsCred a bit later, but
Sure.
Let's turn our attention to this intriguing bet you've made on the future of content marketing. It's based around the concept you call the content marketing imperative. Mm-hmm. What is this and how is it changing marketing?
Yeah, one of the things that really sort of gets me frustrated is when I hear marketers say that content marketing is just a buzzword or it's just a new term for something we've always done. And part of that is actually true. And we talk about how storytelling has been a part of effective marketing from the very beginning. And storytelling has been something that we as a species have used to convey important pieces of information and to connect with others from the day we emerged from caves. The problem is that we've moved away from, as businesses, the understanding that it's the connection we need to make with our customers that's important. And so the content marketing imperative for me, and the definition I've used of content marketing, is the gap between what content brands produce and the information or the stories that our audience is looking for. And so if you think of it as, sort of a Venn diagram, there's two concentric circles, and unfortunately they should be completely aligned, but there's only a very small amount of overlap, right? So it's the thing in the middle. It's the area of overlap that is content marketing. It's where brands tell stories that we as an audience want to engage with. And it's, to me, an imperative because we've gotten so far away from this notion of telling stories that our audience wants to read and wants to share. And we continue to see, I think, a lack of courage in the marketing organizations across many businesses where we just simply talk about ourselves. And social media has kind of changed the game, right? It's all about a conversation that we as businesses are invited to. And unfortunately, too many times we show up and we just talk about ourselves, and nobody wants that guest at their party.
Now, I know there's lots of great juicy stats to back all this up, but if we sort of flip things on their head a bit, what's wrong with conventional marketing in this context?
I usually start with the quote from Peter Drucker, and I'm a big fan of his, and I think he's got a couple of great quotes about marketing. But the one that I really love is that, the aim of marketing is to get and keep customers. And yet what we in marketing have used primarily are the things that push people away. So instead of using the techniques and the tactics that attract people to our businesses, we're using tactics and techniques like interruptive marketing, advertising, that push people away. It's the thing people want to ignore, not the thing people want to consume, or not the things that attract people to our businesses. And so, yeah, the stats, Nielsen and Yankelovich, market research firm, partnered up on a study to look at the number of marketing messages the average U.S. consumer looks at. It's about 5,000 messages per day, and I don't think there's too much variability around the world in that. We look at things like banner ads, and the average click-through rate is 99.9 something percent, depending on your industry. And we celebrate sometimes the 0.0% click-through rates that we get on certain banners, or we celebrate the fact that on mobile we're getting a 0.4% click-through rate. And how, I don't know in what universe that's effective, or that could be considered effective. And so we look at all these different open rates for emails and click-through rates on banner ads, and the percentage of TV commercials that are skipped when people are given the option to skip them is almost approaching 90% in almost every marketing tactic category. And so we're wasting our marketing dollars, and we're wasting it because we're using tactics that, like I said, are the things that people are trying to avoid and ignore. And not spending that hard-earned money on the kinds of things that engage people and bring them to us. And so that's what I think is the real problem with marketing today.
I've been watching some of the talks you've been giving on this subject, and one of the stats that really stuck out was, didn't you say you're more likely to be struck by lightning than isn't that true, than click on banner ads? Or what exactly is that one?
So mathematically, believe it or not, you have a better chance of winning the Powerball like a lottery, being struck by lightning, or dying in a plane crash than you are of having someone click on your banner. And it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek to say these things, but when you get into the math in certain industries, it gets pretty daunting. And, we joke about it, and I even reference the song that banners have 99 problems and a click ain't one. But while we can laugh about it, it's really pretty depressing.
But this is terrifying, though, isn't it? On one level, if you've been marketing using the perceived knowledge your whole career, and then this stuff is obviously not working, something needs to change, doesn't it? That's right. And, we look at NewsCred, and I know we're going to talk about what we do in a second, but the founding principle for NewsCred was to really help journalism, which is something we feel is worth saving. And, unfortunately, the problem that we see today in the media industry, it's not with journalism itself, it's with the advertising model that supports it. And so, again, it's back to this quote: we need to start being the thing that people are interested in and stop being the thing that people are trying to ignore, things that are interrupting the things that people want. And so that's the changes that I think we need to see. Okay, so looking at specifics going forward, how do we as businesses connect with our target audience to sell our products and services? You've mentioned storytelling. You talk about becoming a publisher. How do we actually do that?
Yeah. So I think it starts with this notion of, I call it a culture of content. And I saw this at SAP, right? So, we would talk about implementing a certain kind of marketing program that, in some cases might be something like thought leadership or educational material. And there would be a question from a senior person that would say, well, how much software is this going to sell? There's this belief, it's almost, I think it's human instinct and human nature to believe that unless we're pushing the product, that it's not going to actually sell something. And yet that's why marketing is hard, right? Because it's counterintuitive. We actually have to stop talking about ourselves and what we're selling and earn people's trust, right? At a human level, when you think about this from a human perspective, it makes total sense, right? We know that as people, we're attracted to people that we know and like and trust. And yet when we walk inside the buildings that we work in, we think that we need to start talking about ourselves and the products that we sell. And so that's the major challenge, is to implement this culture of content. Marketers need the courage to be able to push back on the sales organization or the senior leadership and say, you know what, I know what is going to help us to attract and earn the trust of the audience that we're trying to reach, and it's not by promoting our products. So that's really the first step, I think, is getting marketing to take a leadership position in creating this culture of content that puts our customers first.
Okay, so if I'm sitting down with a team of people, we've been charged with, inbound marketing, content marketing within our organisation. We've maybe not done it before. We've got a blank editorial calendar, a content hub or a blog to fill with content. What specific types of content are we looking at? How do we communicate these stories to our customers?
This is, I think, something that feels very daunting for a lot of brands today. And I call it the isolated marketer. There's these massive brands, massive businesses around the world who have one or two people inside them that are responsible for answering this very question. And I feel bad for these people. I was that guy, And so the answer to the question, though, is that it's really not that difficult. And it's not that it's not easy. I mean, it's definitely got its challenges. But the approach is relatively simple. And the approach is simply that you need to understand the questions that your customers are asking and the formats that they're consuming in order to get those answers and to be the answer, right? So let me just repeat that. So your customers are asking questions that lead them down a buyer journey, right? So as a business, you simply need to identify those questions, and you have the expertise, you have the knowledge inside your companies to answer those questions. And sometimes it may be an article, and sometimes it may be a video. All of these things are ultimately knowable from the digital technologies that we have to understand what your customers are looking for, what answers to what questions they're looking for. You can identify those questions and start to build your editorial calendar around answering them.
And the answers to some of these questions in the whole landscape, the whole marketplace of your business might include talking about your competitors directly, mightn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of a trick I employed while at SAP was to put it into sort of like search engine optimization techniques. You can actually rank for your competitors' keywords if you talk about how you differentiate yourselves versus your competitor. So if you earn the trust of your audience and you can be objective and talk about, hey, we see our competitors, they have this different point of view, they have these strengths and weaknesses, and we take a different point of view, and these are our strengths and weaknesses. And if you earn that trust and you tell a story objectively, you can actually begin to rank ahead of your own competitors' keywords. And it's actually a pretty interesting and not used technique that I think brands can take advantage of.
And that's a massive cultural mindset shift, though, isn't it? For your traditional old-fashioned marketers to talk about their competitors would seem counterintuitive, wouldn't it?
It is. And there's a case study that is actually going to be published in a few weeks on this very topic. And it's something we did at SAP. We saw a competitor write an article, and it was a great article. It was 7 steps to effective something, right? So just imagine for your listeners, for their own categories. And we looked at it and we said, you know what, if we're thinking like a publisher and we're covering this industry like journalists would cover it, this is a really great piece of content. We should cover this. So we wrote an article about it, and we linked to the research that the competitor had clearly funded in. And the article did extremely well. We got in trouble by our management team. They sort of sent an email to me on a Friday afternoon with a couple of expletives and said, what the heck is going on here? And I said, hey, just give me the weekend. I'm going to pull some numbers and I'm going to show you what happened. And what we found was we had tens of thousands of people come in and consume that piece of content on our branded platform. We had hundreds of those people go on to continue to look at the solutions that we sold as a business, and only a couple went and clicked through to the research on the competitor landing page. It was actually an amazing case study on how, when you think like a publisher, and that's the answer to the question, right? If you stop thinking like someone who's trying to sell something and start thinking about yourself as a teacher, as the guide along the buyer journey, like a publisher would, where you're just simply answering customer questions, it changes the whole mind shift. It changes the whole mindset that you have and the way you approach the marketing that you execute.
And your answer there, it's touched upon something. It's actually made me think about the next question in a different way. I was going to ask you about the content promotion process. Obviously, if you publish stuff, they don't necessarily come and engage with that content on your blog or the Content Hub itself. But you're saying if you're thinking like a publisher, that kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, it does. It does to an extent. So where we started when I first built the Content Hub at SAP was we actually started with the search terms that people were using, our audience was using, the largest terms. And so SAP sold big data. And so we looked at, what's the first question people ask? And it was pretty simply, what is big data? And so by answering that question, we naturally gained search results, traffic from search inquiries, and the people that consumed our content, if they found it quality, they shared it. And so there was a natural organic amount of traffic. But I do believe in the rule that even good content needs a little bit of a push.
Sure.
And so there's a virtuous cycle that can start. Not every term is going to be a search term. Sometimes you have to think ahead of your market. And so I often, tell people that if you look at Hollywood movies, they spend about 50% of their budget on the production of the movie and 50% on the distribution and marketing. And so if that model, 50% on production, 50% on distribution, works for Hollywood, they've learned over 100 years how to make that work. And so we as marketers should think that same way as well.
So we're talking social media channels. What other promotional types are you looking at?
The site that I managed at SAP we were linked very closely in with the advertising team. And they were running advertising banners. And they were spending, significant amounts of money on banner ads that we happened to be lucky enough to be the landing page for. And I had a very tiny budget for distribution, and we used content distribution platforms. Outbrain is one that you might be familiar with. Mm-hmm. Taboola is another. There's others, native ad platforms like Nativo and Sharethrough. So I spent a tiny amount of money using that kind of distribution platform, which is essentially contextual. And what that means is if somebody's reading an article that's related to a piece of content that you might have on your site, it'll show up in a list of related articles. And so because it's contextual and it's not an ad, it's really just a recommendation to read something similar, the click-through rates are tremendously much more effective. And so with a very small amount of money, I generated more traffic than we saw from a very large amount of money driving from banner ads.
And were you using clickbait style titles for those pieces?
I don't know what clickbait is. I mean, to me, clickbait is like 50 cute pictures of kittens. But we were certainly, again, following that mantra of answering your customer questions. We work list articles, or listicles as some people call them. There's a reason they perform well. And the reason they perform well is that they're useful to people. Like, what are the top 10 challenges businesses face when it comes to closing your books at the end of the month? I mean, I don't know what the questions might be for each of your listeners' businesses, but answering those questions in a very simple and short way is ultimately useful. So yeah, we had articles as part of the mix that included top 10 lists and 50 ways to do something. I wouldn't call them clickbait, but yeah, those kinds of articles do well for a reason.
Okay, and talking about different type of engagement, a call to action for each of those pieces, how are you getting the engagement you want from the content without it sort of being artificial or forced? Yeah,
so I mean, I think part of the trick there is you need to set a quality bar first. And so before we even started, I think it's important for a brand to think about what level of quality is going to be important to your business from a minimum kind of table stakes perspective, and then make sure that the amount of articles or the amount of content you produce is always meeting that quality level. And so that's where we started, so that when people did come, I think when your audience does begin to engage in your content, you need to make sure that they have a quality experience, that you're not hurting yourself with the quality. And so I established an editorial guideline. We talked about how, for example, we wouldn't promote any products in the content that we were producing. And we always had an editor review the articles to make sure there was proper grammar and all of those kinds of things. We used high quality, high resolution images in every post, and we try to tell stories in multimedia ways and things like that. So I think setting that quality bar is really important, so that number one, you're providing a great experience when people come, but number two, that you're actually helping your brand, not hurting it as you go.
What was the call to action on a specific piece of multimedia content like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I got to tell you, I was wrong more than I was right, and I think that's true of any marketer who gets involved in, let's call it multivariate or any kind of optimization testing. The reason you do that kind of testing is because you are wrong more than you're right. And so when we started, we thought that people would read an article and then they would go on to explore a product or solution page relative to that article. And I was wrong. What we found was the call to action that made most sense was more of a next step as opposed to the ultimate step. And I'll give you an example. If someone was reading an article about big data, the audience we found, no matter how intrusive we became, was not willing to go explore SAP solutions around big data. What they were willing to do, though, was to become more educated on the topic. And so we created something called the Ultimate Guide to Big Data. And we found that our customers were then willing to take that next step in learning about the topic in a much deeper way. That was one key learning. We also found that the audience of people that subscribe to our content marketing efforts, those people ultimately went on to convert in deeper ways. So the point was the call to action had to be relative to the next step in the buyer journey. And where we offered that kind of content, we saw tremendously high conversion rates.
Okay, then off the back of that, they obviously join your email list, your database of interested prospects. Was there then a direct contact with them by some sort of phone call, or what was the interaction after that?
So we didn't call people directly, but what we found was that along the journey, we were always offering an opportunity for our readers to engage with SAP from a sales perspective, to register for events, to attend webcasts. And each one of those, I would say, let's call them a gate into the sales funnel. So what we found was that by just simply making those things available as opposed to pushing them as offers, we found people opting in. And that's where the value really came.
You're listening to the Content Champion Podcast, showcasing the best content marketing strategies across the web.
We're back with Michael Brenner. You've talked about brands and larger companies. What about smaller firms, SMEs, how they quantify this? Perhaps, they might not have the resources to allocate to this, and they might not be in a particularly inspiring sector. How do they get around that?
Yeah, so I think the first myth of content marketing that we should try to bust is that it's expensive or it requires a lot of resources. And what I mean by that is that I think and I've been that person, if you're a marketing department of one and you have very little budget, the best way to reach the audience of people who don't know who you are as a small business marketing person is through effective stories. And so when I was in that position, I used to tell what I called customer profile stories. And by customer profile stories, I meant not customer testimonials. I didn't talk about customer A bought our product B because of reason C. What I talked about and the stories I told as the head of marketing for a small company was, hey, here's a story about Joe, and Joe's the chief operating officer at this company, and he faced this problem, and here's the path of the journey he took to solve that problem. And now by calling him a customer, it's inferred, right, that the guy made a solution decision for our company. But I didn't have to tell that part of the story because I knew that if I sort of toned down the amount of promotional selling and talked more about this guy as a person, that I was going to reach more people. So that's, I think, number one is it doesn't take a lot of money and it doesn't take a lot of resources if you're in a small business. In fact, I think content marketing, I loved the quote from Seth Godin, content marketing is all the marketing that's left. And so I think if you're in a small business, content marketing should be the first thing that you look to focus your resources on. Another myth is, I'm in the healthcare industry, which is heavily regulated, or my company sells ball bearings to industrial manufacturers, and that's not, people don't use the web to make those decisions. And all of those things are defense mechanisms that in every industry, you've got people making buying decisions, and those people need help. And you and your business can be the source of that information to help them ultimately in the journey. So even if you're selling ball bearings in industrial manufacturing, there's a story to tell. There's information you can publish as a brand marketer that can help the target audience that you're trying to reach.
I guess playing devil's advocate, there is another potential problem with this from the sort of SME, small business and internal large brand marketing team perspective, and that is measuring return on investment. How do you suggest we do this?
Yeah, I actually love when I get that question. And again, I think it's also a defense mechanism in many situations. And so, for example, I had a pretty large enterprise CMO ask me that question in a one-on-one conversation. He said, well, content marketing, the problem I have with content marketing is what's the ROI? And I turned it around on him and I asked him, well, what's the ROI of the rest of your marketing? And so the reason that I asked that question is that HubSpot actually just came out with some research. I think it's something like 70% of marketers don't actually measure the ROI of their marketing dollars. And so my point is, hey, whatever the ROI you get for marketing is, the content marketing ROI is going to be higher, and the approach you take to measuring it is going to be just as complicated as it is for measuring the rest of marketing. So let's start with that baseline, right? And we've got lots of benchmarks and reports that show that content marketing is more effective. HubSpot, content marketing is 62% lower cost and produces 2 to 3 times more leads than other approaches. We had Kraft present at Content Marketing World a few weeks ago, and their head of content was talking about how content marketing is 4 times more effective than the rest of their traditional marketing activities. I think that the answer to the question, it's relative to the business, and it requires a business that's truly committed to measuring ROI for marketing, and then content marketing just simply becomes one of the channels that you measure. There's 3 or 4 levers you need to be able to pull in order to really identify ROI for content marketing. So number 1 is you have to know what the cost of your content is. And right, ROI is a mathematical calculation, so first you need to know the cost. The second thing is, this is something most people miss, is we talk about 60 to 70% of most marketing that's created by brands goes completely unused. So the second thing you have to measure is not just the cost of your content, but then you have to see how much of that content actually gets utilized. What happens is a vice president asks for a white paper. It takes you 6 weeks to create it, and by the time it's created, it's no longer needed. So that kind of content, there's a cost to it, but it never even gets to a point where you can measure its effectiveness. It's the utilization rate. And then the third piece, you're measuring some sort of impact externally. And that's where most people start to focus. They say, is a page view, or is, the bounce rate, or is the number of clicks you get on a piece of content, that's not a real business metric. So I think moving from counting clicks and page views to counting something that the business can measure is kind of that final piece. And for example, at SAP, we looked at, like you said, the email subscriptions. We could, in some sense, quantify them. But more importantly, it was the people that registered for events and downloaded white papers and clicked to call to talk to a sales representative. Those were leads that we could quantify in a way the business understood. So it's a complicated, complex process, but those are the factors that drive the answer.
Let's just move on to looking at Timeframe for all this before we go on to look at NewsCred. How long does it take for a content hub to mature? What do we need to be doing? Blogging a couple of times a week? How long will it take to see the results that everyone wants?
There's many factors involved in the answer to that question. I will say that one of the decisions a business has to make is, if they're starting from scratch, there's going to be some time that you need to be able to invest in order to see the results. At SAP, we were fortunate enough that there already were some, let's say, siloed and isolated content marketing efforts happening that I was able to really bring together and unify, and that created a much shorter time to value. But I think for most businesses, I think you're looking at months. I don't think you're looking at years, but I think you're looking at many months. We were actually able to show a return, literally in the form of sales leads, quantified sales leads, within a couple of months. So that's the answer to the how much time does it take to see value. The answer to how often you should be publishing per day is, the guidance I always give people is once per day per topic, so that if your business is involved in more than one, let's say, category of solution, you should be blogging at least or producing content at least once per day for each of those different solution areas or categories. Research has shown that companies that produce content more than once per day are significantly more effective than those that produce once per day or fewer. And so that's the guidance I would give.
Okay, let's talk about the content marketing software NewsCred and how it can help us in this context.
Yeah, sure. NewsCred, we say we're the leading content marketing platform. And what we mean by that is we're not just a piece of software, not just a technology. And so some of the problems that you face as a content marketer is, number one, the editorial calendar and the development of that calendar and the management of that calendar. So NewsCred can certainly help you with that. And the second thing is the editorial workflow. So for example, if you're the publisher on your content marketing platform and you have a new story idea, you want to assign that to a writer, and then the writer gets a designer involved, and then they submit a story, and you as the editor need to approve it, and then your social media person needs to share it. All of those sort of workflow actions that currently take place generally by email today or by Excel spreadsheet, NewsCred has a platform that can deliver that. That's kind of the standard content marketing technology stack. What NewsCred does is so much more. NewsCred brings in the ability to work with journalists and designers and photographers from a new content creation perspective, the ability to bring in licensed content from well-known publishers that you can source at a fraction of the cost of original content to gain tremendous reach from an audience perspective. The social distribution, the measurement of analytics around how your content's performing, and then the piece that I brought to the company is really sort of the whole strategy and how do you implement effective content marketing strategies? How do you get started? What kind of team do you need to put in place? What kind of budget? How do you build the ROI business case? All of those things are really how I'm helping our customers to achieve success with content marketing.
Okay, and let's just step back for a general question before we start to wind up. If businesses don't embrace a content marketing culture in the future, what do you think will happen to them?
Yeah, and it's why I call it the content marketing imperative. I mean, I think we're going to start to see a shift in marketing as a function is going to slowly devolve in those places where content marketing isn't understood or taken up into basically just pure advertising. And so, when the CEO wants to see his logo on a sports stadium, you don't need a lot of heavy, deep thinking to do that. In fact, you can probably outsource it to an agency. And so you're going to see, I think, marketing, I call it little m marketing, devolve in some cases to basically just advertising and lead generation and blowing balloons up at events, right? So event marketing. And the reason that I think that's going to happen is those are the situations where either the CMO doesn't create that culture of content, the marketing organization doesn't understand the sort of new world that we live in, the always-on connected consumer who's looking for stories to engage with. So that's what's going to happen, I think, to those that don't take it on. And then you're going to see brands like GE and Red Bull and Target and P&G and Unilever, these brands that have really figured out how to tell stories and connect with their audience, and they're showing results. And so in those companies, marketing is going to get a more strategic position, a seat at the board table, helping the company understand how to connect with consumers and how to evolve the business.
Brilliant. Just before the PS question, can you remind us where we can find you online, please?
I blog at b2bmarketinginsider.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Brenner Michael, and look forward to engaging with your audience there.
Wait for it, listeners. Here comes the PS question.
Okay, this is what I call the PS question. Could you please share an advanced content marketing strategy that we can action right after this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. We have what we call the brand strategy framework, and it's about, I think, 21 questions that basically start with, why does your business exist? What purpose does it serve? And it moves all the way down through how many articles per day you should be publishing and what topics you should be talking about. So I'm happy to share that with your audience.
Fantastic. Well, look, this has been a great conversation, some fantastic insights there. And I'd just like to thank you very much for your time, Michael, and wish you all the best of luck in future.
Sounds good. Thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to the Content Champion podcast, available at contentchampion.com, Stitcher, Zune, the BlackBerry Network, and on iTunes. Until next time, thanks for listening.